Hello, everyone, and welcome. This is Professor Hall, and today we are talking about modernism. Depending on what class you're in, we might be looking at a specific movement within modernism. So that's exciting. Or you might be in a class where we're just talking about modern literature as a whole. A lot of times people in literature, and what they really mean is contemporary literature. But modernism was a movement, a very specific one. And today I want to just give you some historical background of some of the people and events and things that were going on in the world, and particularly the United States, that influenced writers and then also sometimes musicians and artists and architecture and all of those kind of things, as this modern art and modern literature came into fruition. So let's get started. You can see, unlike my very chipper voice, we have some doom and gloom pictures here, but we'll go into all of that. So, a little bit about World War I. World War I is something that really looms large in the minds of the writers of the modern period. So, the Lost Generation, the Harlem Renaissance writers, some of the other movements of that time. And I think that this is something we don't often talk about in school, or if we do, it's kind of like a precursor to World War II. And sometimes we talk about World War I and World War II like one large war with a depression, an economic depression in the middle, which is one way to look at it. But just to focus on World War I a little bit, it was called the Great War. You see some images here from that time, soldiers on a train and one being taken out of the trenches, looking over the cannons while we're wearing a gas mask. So we have the Central Powers, which are Germany, Austria-Hungary, the Ottoman Empire. And then we have the Allied forces, Great Britain. The United States got cut off here. Of course, the United States joined much later. France, Russia, Italy, and Japan kind of allied together. So really, the thing about World War I, the first thing that you need to know is that this is the first time that modern technology was available. Modern warfare just had an unprecedented amount of carnage and destruction on a scale that had never been seen before. Tanks, chemical warfare, gas masks, flamethrowers, aerial warfare with the development of planes, steel helmets. There was filmed propaganda for the first time, wireless communications. And I'm just going to... Here we go. I don't know if you can see so well the gas mask here that he's wearing, especially if you're watching this on your phone, but you can at least see the haze, right, that this guy is in. So all of these kind of things, there are some other ones too that are a little bit more clear, and mass rounds of artillery, as you can see there with the gun with the huge thing of bullets in it. 9 million soldiers were killed by the end of the war in November 1918. So a staggering number of people killed. Many more, because of the chemical warfare, had other problems, obviously, coming out of it. And we had what would have been called shell shock at the time. Now we would call it PTSD, or possibly even complex PTSD, if a soldier was there for a long period of time. Not just one incident, but over and over and over, right? The post-traumatic stress disorder. So even for the people who did not necessarily fight in the war, they were truly affected by these events. And some of the authors that we're going to be looking at did participate in various ways. Some were soldiers, others ran ambulances, and tried to help with the war effort. Here you can see, this is the after image. Even today, this is where the trenches were. So you can see how deep and how long, and how they've kind of even today still kind of scarred the land. So technically, and you may have, if you've studied this in school, you probably heard this part before, that World War I began with the assassination of the Archduke Ferdinand of Austria-Hungary. So in 1914, a Serbian nationalist assassinated the Archduke as well as his wife as they were in a procession, and this kind of set off a chain of events that led to various countries taking sides, and thus World War I began. Really, we have kind of deeper causes. If it were just the death of one person, I don't think it would have gone, to such extremes. But we have militarism, which is basically an arms race where a number of different countries are building up arms. And because of that technology that I just talked about, and that you see here, the aircraft are coming into fruition. We have the Model T invented, the car in 1908. The assembly line production begins by 1913. So we have these motorized vehicles as well as aircraft. And so various countries concerned about this begin stockpiling. And this happens later on in history with nuclear arms as well, right? So in addition, we have nationalism where countries are kind of excluding other countries and pushing them away and saying, we're the most important, we're the best, that kind of exceptionalism. We have imperialism, which we're going to see a picture of in a moment, and mutual alliances. So this sets up a hotbed and really is what fully leads to the war, not just the assassination, but the fact that you have all of these countries that think they're the best. They're colonizing other countries of the world, and the fight then becomes really over various land disputes. Who's going to own what? Which king is going to get which territory? Who's going to be on which person's side? And all of that. Later, an author that I read, this is what always stuck with me, and I just want to leave just the words here for a moment. I know I skipped to the picture. An exercise in futility. This is something that I read in a historical book one time, that this historian was calling World War I an exercise in futility. That is an idea, I think, that is captured in a lot of modernist writers, that they felt like this was a futile exercise, that it ultimately meant nothing. And part of the reason for that, again, is how this war came to be. If we see Tsar Nicholas of Russia, King George of England, and the Kaiser Wilhelm II of Germany, and the Austro-Hungarian Empire, the Ottoman Empire, of course, aligned with that. All of these people are related. And so what you have basically are cousins kind of dividing up, coming into alliances, right? Italy, Germany, Hungary, the Ottoman Empire, Serbia kind of in the middle here, Russia, Britain aligning with France. And so cousins are arguing over the world and who gets to own it. And I think that if we look at World War II, World War II is asking questions about, like, is fascism a viable form of government? And what happens when dictators take power? And how can we prevent human rights violations? And those types of things. And so what you have coming out of World War II, we'll talk about generations in a minute, but what you have coming out of World War II is the greatest generation, who felt like when they fought for a war, they were fighting for something, that the imperialism of Japan, that the horrors that were going on with Germany and throughout Europe, that they had a cause that they were fighting for. Whereas I think that the people who came out of World War I did not often feel that way. They often, at least through the literature, seems that they felt like, it's 9 million people who died for 3 cousins who were in an argument, kind of essentially. And so, yes, I think it did seem very futile. And here's the kind of destruction we're talking about. Now, this is a building that has been since restored, but this is what happened during World War I. And you can see this very odd mix here, right? That we have still the carts and horse-drawn wagons and men on horseback alongside tanks, basically. So this very interesting kind of time in history. So then we come into the Roaring 20s. As I said, a lot of soldiers were suffering. This is a lot of S's. Soldiers were suffering from shell shock, physical problems from the war, the effects of poisonous gases, mustard gas, tear gas, chlorine, those types of things. The automobile assembly lines made cars available. And the car, very interestingly, kind of leads to this change in courtship rituals. So dating before used to be like a person usually from your hometown would come and court you and sit on your parents' front stoop and come to dinner with the family. And now teenagers have cars and they can drive places together by themselves. It kind of starts beginning this formation of a youth culture for people in their teens and 20s who kind of are starting to come of age at this time. Films start to emerge. Hollywood expands. We're going to see how that affects literature as well. Radio broadcasts. We don't talk as much about radio as we do about TV, but radio really dominated popular culture for many, many decades. ABC, NBC, and CBS actually start out not as television stations, but as radio stations. By the end of the 1930s, almost every home owns at least one radio. There are flappers having a good old time. Also, we start to have a change in the role of women. Women served in the military in World War I in limited capacity, but they were there in different roles. In 1919, the 19th Amendment passes. Women are able to vote by 1920. So this first wave of feminism, it's called, where women are trying to get the vote and trying to be able to have a say in governmental policy. Prohibition is also going on. The Noble Experiment begins in 1920 and lasts until 1933. That's kind of a misnomer because in many places, alcohol was prohibited in the 1800s, kind of by state law. And it's not till 1920 that the amendment passes. Women really had a large role in prohibition as well. It was a lot of women's suffrage groups that were also fighting for prohibition because of the violence at home that would often occur when people drank. But bootlegging, the illegal creation and distribution of alcohol, led a lot of gang violence, organized crime, and a lot of people died or went blind from the bootleg liquor, because it's poor quality and then it's not made correctly. It can be basically poisonous. So so all that's going on. The Russian Revolution and the Red Scare happens toward the end of World War I and just after. So Russia, which was an ally during World War I, has its own problems, and the people rise up and revolt, right? And so then Russia eventually becomes a communist country, and there are fears that this could happen in the United States as well. You see this little political cartoon, "Come unto me, ye oppressed," but the oppressed is the European anarchist with a bomb ready to kind of destroy the symbol of the United States. We also have, which are extremely important to understanding movements in modernism like the Harlem Renaissance, Jim Crow laws and segregation come into effect. The KKK, which starts a little after the Civil War. By this point in the 1920s, it's kind of at its peak. It grows to about 4 million members. By the 1930s, it starts to decline. There's a reappearance during the Civil Rights Movement. And then a lot of people think that the racism is just going on in the South. Now, the Jim Crow laws, basically, because of those, a lot of people who are African American move up to the North looking for better opportunities. In the North, they don't have Jim Crow laws, or they didn't, rather, at the time, which would have been statewide regulations, right? But instead, what happens is that other regulations are put into place to separate and segregate people. So unofficial rules. Here's an example of what's called redlining. Redlining is basically a bank would give people loans to build houses in certain districts. And these red districts here, they would not give people money to buy homes. And that was almost entirely based upon the racial makeup of those neighborhoods. So basically, neighborhoods where you have Hispanic people, African American people, Asian people, et cetera, people of color is basically an umbrella term. Wherever you have higher percentages of people of color, that is redlined. So banks wouldn't give people loans to buy or build homes, and then less so in these yellow districts, and then the blue are fine, basically. What ends up happening is it's not just the homes, it's also services. So no hospitals are built, proper schools are not built, or schools are not fixed up or renovated, right? And then you have things like grocery stores are not going in. And we still see the effects of that today. You know, people live in, for example, a food desert, which is a place where there are no grocery stores within, a certain number of miles. And so then you have people buying food from like convenience stores and fast food chains because there's no fresh food to be found. So basically, this is to say that a lot of people of color came from the South hoping that things were better. And in some ways, they might have been better, and in other ways, they were not. The Great Depression. So our period of modernism begins at the close of World War I. Sometimes we mark it from the beginning of World War I till the end of World War II. But the Great Depression is right smack in the middle. And after the so-called Roaring '20s, when the economy was doing quite well, the stock market crashed in October of 1929. At that point, banks were not insured. We have now the FDIC, which is the Fed, or basically the federal bank, which insures smaller banks, so that if a bank loses a large amount of money, that money is insured and people can get their money. At that point, they were not. So if you've ever seen It's a Wonderful Life, there's a run on the bank, meaning people know that the bank has lost money, the stock market's crashed. They're trying to all get their money at the same time, knowing that the bank might not have it the next day. So runs on banks, many banks failed. Farmers had been protected from previous depressions because they could feed themselves. Right? So you kind of revert back to what's known as subsistence agriculture, where you're feeding yourself and your family. But the Great Plains were hit with a drought, and there were these dust storms throughout the region that is typically known as like the more fertile area, the breadbasket, if you will, of America. Millions of people are out of work and homeless. The farms are struggling. Many farmers are displaced. You can see this is from a very famous photographic series. This is, I believe, in Oklahoma. A woman and her children in this barren kind of now Dust Bowl area, trying to survive in a almost camping type of situation. So people are traveling by the railroad, they're hitchhiking to look for work. And what's interesting to me is if you look at movies of this time, they're showing the complete opposite. Movies of the 1930s are all about like opulence and wealth, and it's really an escapist kind of fantasy, which is fascinating, I think. But this is the reality. People walking around with placard signs, not asking for money, as we have very often, but asking for specific jobs. I'm a war veteran from World War I, obviously, native Chicago. I have experience in purchasing and accounting, etc. The other man wanted family man, best preference, clerical or manual experience, 3 years at Ford, negotiable on salary, both of them, they just want work, right? These are things that would be quite typical to see at that time. So this is an example, the unemployment rate. You can see that since the 1940s, we've had a couple times where we've been in recession, but we're basically around this number. And you have to know too that there's almost always a 5 to 6% unemployment rate because of people changing jobs and that kind of thing. So it doesn't necessarily mean like people searching for work. But what happens is that after the stock market crash, the unemployment soars and we top out at nearly 25% unemployed. So a quarter of the country, 1 out of every 4 people doesn't have a job. Here is a picture of the dust clouds rolling over the prairies, Kansas. So you can kind of see how that would destroy all the crops. And it takes a long time, too, for the soil to recover from a thing like that. So even if it just happened 1 year, it would take a while for the recovery. Yeah, there's a man just kind of showing how the droughts affected the land. Another family in that region, you can see that, they're wearing kind of raggy clothes and no shoes. The kids probably grew out of them. And then this is what would have been called Hooverville. That is a place named after President Herbert Hoover, where outside of the city, they would set up all of these camps of people who were homeless and looking for work and that kind of thing. All right, and then we come into World War II. To World War II. Do the job he left behind. We have in the center with a woman who is ready to go to work. World War II, because of the war effort, we have an explosion of jobs. If you saw in that graph I just showed you, real steep decline in World War II from about 20% unemployment rate down to about 3%. Women take jobs of men when men go overseas. So a lot of women machinists, as we see here, and of course the famous like Rosie the Riveter. Rationing begins to happen. So wanted for victory, waste paper, old rags, scrap metal, old rubber. A lot of people begin recycling, which is nice. And they're contributing it to the war effort. So scrap metals being used for various things. Rationing gives you your fair share. A lot of people willing to hold off and get ration coupons so that the resources could go to the troops overseas. The bombing of Pearl Harbor is there. And then here are some soldiers. And we also, up in this corner, this is a picture of a Japanese internment camp. If you've taken my class on Asian American literature, I talk a little bit more about that. If you haven't, the videos are also online on this YouTube channel, and you can watch them any point. But you can kind of see beginning prosperity a little bit after World War II. We go into what we call postmodernism, and the values and things like that begin to change because of those historic events. So, this period, here we go, of modernism. We're going to talk more specifically about the literary changes and characteristics next time. But I really just wanted to give you all of this to let you know that all of these things are affecting the way that people look at the world, and they have a huge effect on morals and values and family structures and beliefs and the way that people are seeing the world and writing about it, particularly as the world becomes more globalized and we begin to have all of these connections with other countries that prior to aviation and prior to changes of technology and prior to the car and the assembly line and all of that we didn't really have. And so in our next lecture, we will get into that more. And until then, have a great day. Thanks.